Hello and welcome to the Wood Technology webinar. My name is Barry Nolan and I'll be presenter for the night. My colleagues Declan Regan, Thomas Boyle and Anthony Griffin are joining us remotely to provide technical support and also to answer your questions throughout the webinar. We're also going to be joined by a teacher by the name of Owen de Blanca, who works in Coláiste na Carba in Galway, who will share his experiences of designing and implementing a unit of learning with his first year Wood Technology class. Thank you for taking the time to log in and join us. In this webinar, we hope to reinforce your experiences from your cluster day and further develop your understanding of working with learning outcomes with a specific focus on classroom practice. I would like to thank all the teachers who engaged with us during the Wood Technology clusters over the past number of months. It was great to work with so many dedicated teachers up and down the country. We met approximately 1,200 teachers in total since last November. In your handouts tab, which is located in the GoToWebinar interface, you will find a number of documents that we will reference during tonight's webinar. An information flyer for our 3-week design challenge, a plan for a unit of learning that we will discuss, a student logbook to support this unit of learning, an editable Word document titled Exploring Learning Outcomes, and an editable Word document titled Wood Technology Digital Planning Tool. If you have any questions, please ask them using the GoToWebinar interface. Type the question into the question box at any time during the webinar. We will create a queue and answer as many questions as possible during the webinar. Only myself and the other panelists can see these questions. The slide, which is currently on the screen, displays the homepage for www.jct.ie. We'll now take a brief look at the technology section. So to get there, firstly, we will click on Technologies. That will bring us to a landing page for the Technology section. On this landing page, you will see there are 6 tiles and also a number of smaller tiles underneath. One of those is to join the mailing list, which is an important thing to do, or maybe consider doing if you haven't done so already, in terms of staying in the loop with the Wood Technology team. The other tiles indicate the section where our key documents are located, such as the specification and our assessment guidelines. Our news and events section will keep you up to date with different initiatives that are running throughout the course of the year. Our CPD workshop section contains the learning log, the PowerPoint presentation and various other resources from last year's cluster day and also the previous years. And equally, today's webinar and last year's webinar are hosted in the CPD workshop section in the electives tab, which is located in the menu on the left-hand side. We have a planning section which contains various documents relating to planning, such as our paper planning tool, our digital planning tools, our exploring learning outcomes document, and so on. Likewise, we have a tile there that refers to assessment. In here you will find some information relating to assessment in Wood Technology. And likewise, our resources section. Just today, a number of resources have been uploaded to this section that you may find beneficial to send out to your students so they can complete them over the coming days. Over the course of tonight's webinar, we will discuss an approach to introduce the craft of bending and lamination in the Wood Technology classroom through a unit of learning. We will consider the important role learning outcomes and action verbs play when planning appropriate classroom activities for an integrated learning experience. We will discuss the student and teacher experience with this unit and look at examples of work that these students produced. In conjunction with the Arts and Junior Cycle Initiative, the Wood Technology team were delighted to have collaborated with Mastercrafts and Willie Creighton for an elective titled Get Your World Turning. This elective aimed to support teachers' creativity through experimentation with the craft of wood turning, with an emphasis on using the natural properties and aesthetics of the wood to create artifacts of value. Teachers experienced a number of different turning styles, as well as some expert tuition on material selection, defect identification, and a very colourful description of how to self-spalt timber. 3 workshops have taken place to date, 2 in Willie Creighton's own workshop in Mayo, and 1 in the carpentry store in Naas. Unfortunately, other workshops that were scheduled to take place have been postponed until further notice. There was great interest from teachers in these workshops, and all participants had very encouraging things to say about the events. We must also thank Willie Creighton for his time, energy, and expertise for running these workshops. As our webinar falls during National Tree Week, the Wood Technology team are running an initiative. You may find this to be a useful activity to send out to your students as a task to complete over the coming days. The rationale for wood technology states that trees are one of our key natural resources. The sustainable use and management of this natural resource is important as the world faces the challenges of the 21st century, from habitats to construction or recreation to oxygen creation. This resource can play a significant role in the well-being of our planet. This is taken from the Wood Technology Specification, page 4. As part of this initiative, students are asked to design an artifact that celebrates how forests and trees contribute to the enhancement of both our environment and well-being. Your design response may include the following: research and background information that will support your idea, sketches, drawings to communicate your design solution. Your response must be presented on a single A3 page. Please submit entries to jct4competitions@jct4.ie by Friday, April the 3rd. A number of entries will be selected to receive a visit and presentation from one of our partners in this initiative. This flyer can also be located in your handouts tab for further information. On the screen now, you will see the key documents associated with wood technology. We have the framework for Junior Cycle 2015, which is located on www.ncca.ie. We have the specification for wood technology, which is available on curriculumonline.ie, and we have the guidelines for classroom-based assessments in wood technology, which is also found on curriculumonline.ie. All three documents should be considered when planning activities for the wood technology classroom. On the screen now, you will see the learning and assessment journey that a first-year student that started wood technology last September will experience over their 3 years. They will learn through engagement with learning outcomes across the 3 years of wood technology. When we group learning outcomes together, we form units of learning. In second year, our students will experience classroom-based assessment 1, which is titled Wood Science in Our Environment. In third year, our students will experience classroom-based assessment 2, which is self-analysis and evaluation. They will undertake a project which is worth 70% and a final examination that is worth 30%. Both of those components are examined externally by the State Exams Commission. Classroom-based assessment 1 in wood technology is titled Wood Science in Our Environment and takes place in year 2. Students are required to do an investigation and presentation on a wood science related topic. The response can be presented in a wide range of formats. Students can collaborate, but each student must present an individual piece of work. This will take place during a maximum of a 3-week period with support or guidance from the teacher. Details regarding planning, preparation, completion, assessment and reporting of classroom-based assessments in wood technology are available in the classroom-based assessment guidelines for wood technology, which are located on www.curriculumonline.ie. Classroom-based assessment 2 in wood technology is titled Student Self-Evaluation and Analysis and takes place in year 3. Students are required to do an individual analysis of their own skills. The response can be presented in a wide range of formats and will take place during a maximum of a 3-week window with support and guidance from teachers. And again, all information regarding classroom-based assessments in wood technology can be located in our classroom-based assessments guidelines document, which is located on curriculumonline.ie. The classroom activities we design must provide opportunities for our students to develop skills such as research, reflection, and self-analysis. This is important not only for classroom-based assessment completion, but these are also skills that our students will use for project completion and engagement with the design process, and are also part of a larger skill set that they can use throughout their learning journey in junior cycle and carry forward to senior cycle and beyond. So at this stage, I'd like to invite Owen to come in and introduce himself and just give us maybe a little bit of background information on his students in Galway. So I'd like to welcome Owen to the webinar.
Thank you, Barry.
You're very welcome, Owen.
Cheers. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm teaching in Colegh na Curva in Galway for 12 years now. It's a 600 pupil all Irish school. But for the purpose of this unit of learning, English was used for this one.
Okay, Owen, could you give us a little bit of information about the students who were involved in this unit?
Yeah, so you have the photo there of the group. I have 24 in the class. They're mixed ability. As you can see there, gender-wise, I actually have more girls than boys this year in the class.
Okay, that's great, Owen. Thanks very much for that. So I'm just going to turn my camera off again, and Owen might do the same, and we might just move on with things. As teachers, when planning a unit or sequence of learning activities, we must ensure what our students have learned and the lessons and assessment tools that we use align with the curricular expectations of the subject. We must have a clear understanding of why we are doing this. If you consider the rationale and aim of wood technology to be the what and the why, the how will be achieved through engagement with the learning outcomes. By understanding the what and the why, we are better positioned to plan for the how. The rationale and aim of wood technology provide us with the key messages and outline the type of learning experience our students should experience over the 3 years of wood technology. Activation of learning outcomes enable us to ensure this type of learning is possible. On the screen now, you will see a unit of learning that was designed for a first-year group and that ran for 4 weeks. We will discuss with Owen his thinking around this unit, why he took the approach in the way that he did. I will also discuss the selection of learning outcomes and also the creation of resources and the effect that these resources had on the learning experiences with Owen. This unit plan was created using our digital planning tool, which can be found in your handouts tab for this webinar and is also available in the planning section of the technologies area on jct.ie. The plan is broken into 4 sections, which use prompt questions and encourage us to consider my student's age and stage, what learning I intend to focus on, the learning outcomes that I will select for the unit, the key learning that students will experience from these learning outcomes, how my students will experience this learning, and finally, how I will assess my students' learning. And as I said earlier, an editable Word document version of this planning tool is available in your handouts tab and also on the JCT website. In previous units of learning, Owen students have learned about health and safety considerations in the wood technology classroom. They have used a selection of bench tools which involve wood processing such as a tenon saw, marking out tools, cutting and shaping with a coping saw. They've also used pillar drills and a variety of other fixtures and fittings. They've completed a number of design and realization tasks. Here is an example of some work that these students have engaged with. So I'd like to bring Owen back in at this point again and just ask him, what did this particular unit of learning involve, Owen?
Yeah, Barry, it involved design thinking and some primary research. So I got them to, measure up their phones and charging points and whatnot there. I also introduced a small bit of success criteria as well in this section, as well as the bench skills that you mentioned there as well.
Okay, so it sounds like a very comprehensive unit, and equally the work that the students produced, which could be seen in the slide, is of a very good standard with lots of creativity on show. Next, Owen would have considered what learning he wanted to focus on. This will help him to identify potential learning outcomes once he goes on to consider these from the strands and elements within the specification. So on the slide now, you'll be able to see the focus of the learning. Owen, why did you choose these areas for the focus of your unit?
Okay, so I wanted to improve students' design thinking want to get them used to working with a brief, and then I wanted them to explore the benefits, the process and the benefits of lamination of timber. I also wanted to introduce my students to the fixtures and fittings that we use in wood technology. Throughout the unit as well, I wanted them to carry out research relevant to the work in hand and reflect on it as we progressed.
Okay, Owen, thanks very much for that. So Owen identified this broad area of potential learning, and just as he outlined there, he intended to look for outcomes that would promote working with a design brief, the process of lamination, introduction to fixtures and fittings, and students reflecting on their own work. Owen would have used this focus to identify potential learning outcomes from across the strands and elements, which could support this type of learning experience. Upon examination of the planning tool, he identified many potential learning outcomes. This part of the process encourages the teacher to consider a wide range of learning outcomes prior to deciding upon the ones which will feature in any given unit. This part of the process encourages the teacher to consider a wide range of learning outcomes prior to deciding on those that finish in the unit. When choosing the learning outcomes, it is important not to try to cover too many learning outcomes in any one unit. While there is no set maximum or minimum number of learning outcomes that should make up any given unit, we must ensure that students get an integrated learning experience, but equally that the quality of learning is not compromised by having too broad of a focus. The selected learning outcomes can now be seen on the slide, and I'm just going to ask Owen to outline why did he pick these particular outcomes?
Yeah, so when I sat down with the digital planning tool, I kept the key messages from the aim and the rationale of the wood technology specification in mind. So I chose learning outcomes based on potential key learning that I identified within them. I explored the learning outcomes across the strands and the elements, and I selected the learning outcomes that would deliver the key learning. Suitable methodologies and classroom strategies were designed to ensure that the action verbs of the learning outcomes were activated. So to explain that a bit better, if we look at learning outcome 2.6 there, it says produce sketches, drawings and models, prototypes to explore design ideas. So I kind of went away and said to myself, I must set up a situation where my students are required to produce the sketches and drawings of the design ideas. If I give them the drawings, probably something that I would have done in the past, this outcome is not being achieved as it would have been my design idea. So students aren't really activating that action verb. I am.
Okay, Owen, thanks very much for that. So Owen, how did you identify key learning for your chosen learning outcomes?
Yeah, I found this to beneficial to mind map, as you can see on the screen there, mind map some of the learning units, so that I can be able to use them for future reference as well, you know, and identify the key learning from them.
Okay, Owen. And also from your plan, it's evident that you grouped certain learning outcomes together when you identify key learning. Can you outline your thinking around the grouping of those outcomes?
Yeah, I grouped certain learning outcomes together as I felt the key learning within them is linked and could be achieved while students took part in certain tasks. So for example, there I grouped 2.1 and 2.6, the key learning from those, as I wanted students to get into the practice of using sketches to communicate their design ideas. I grouped 1.8 and 1.5 together because in this unit both are linked to learning about the process of lamination. Students will collaborate and explore the process of lamination through a research task. So using primary and secondary methods, they will compile and record information and apply the knowledge when creating the artifact. I took a similar approach when grouping the other outcomes, which can be seen in the plan there as well.
Okay, Owen, that's great to hear. And I suppose just to recap on that a small bit, you would have used our Exploring Learning Outcomes tool when you were breaking down your outcomes to see what potential key learning was contained within them. So at this stage, Owen, having decided on key learning, you now move to your classroom context and you began to consider how could students experience the identified key learning and how this could be assessed. Owen, how did you go about achieving this?
So I was conscious that the methodologies used would deliver the desired key learning and activate the action verbs in the selected learning outcomes.
Okay, so Owen outlined a moment ago that he initially looked at outcomes 2.1 and 2.6 as both outcomes relate to design thinking. The selected classroom activities must promote this. So Owen chose to give his students this design brief to work with. So you can see it on the screen. I'll outline it as well myself. Students were asked to design and create an artifact on which to hang a coat. Part of the artifact should include a single hook to be made from curved laminated timber. The artifact must be fixed to a wall or a door and include a decorative backboard. So by engagement with this, students will learn to break down a design problem. They will identify aspects of the given design brief that require further information. They will communicate their design ideas through sketching. To achieve this key learning, students will explore the design and realization task, which involves lamination of wood. This was a design constraint embedded in the brief. For the process of lamination involving outcomes 1.8 and 1.5, students collaborated to explore the process of lamination through a research task. From exploring the brief, they would have identified that one of the criteria to succeed with this brief was to produce a curved laminated piece of timber. As they would not have engaged in this process before, this is something that they would have had to go and research and find out about more. So by starting with a design brief, Owen is striving to foster a problem-solving approach with his students. Owen, why did you do this?
I did this to activate the key learning from the outcomes 1.8 and 1.7. The students will have to produce a response to the given brief, which will involve lamination, decorative shaping and embellishment of the material. The artifact must be wall or door mounted using appropriate fixtures and fittings. By engaging with these outcomes, the students will learn how to use the tools and equipment associated with lamination of wood and their applications while realizing the task there. They will be required to select a suitable way to fix the artifact to the wall or door, and they'll be asked to explain why they chose that in their own words. The design brief, through its constraints, allows this key learning to occur. So again, I took a similar approach for the remaining outcomes in the unit, again, as you can see in the plan there.
Okay, Owen, so it's becoming evident to me that you put certain constraints into your design brief to ensure that the response to the brief brought the students in a particular direction, which activated key learning that you identified earlier in the plan.
Yeah.
In order to assess his students' progress and create evidence of learning, Owen chose to use a student learning journal. The student learning journal was used to scaffold and structure and document the learning experience. This learning journal was used to capture students' use of sketches when communicating their design ideas. It was also used to document and present research and provide a space in which students could reflect using prompt questions that Owen had harvested from the student design guide. The finished artifact also is a powerful assessment tool for both the realization, skills, and also design components within this task. The learning journal, along with the finished artifact and ongoing teacher observations and formative conversations, provide us with evidence of learning. As we now move towards the final stages of this plan, we will recap on the chosen learning outcomes and their action verbs to ensure that the chosen assessments align with them. At all times, the learning activities should ensure that the action verbs of the chosen learning outcomes were being activated. Students were required to do this at various times during this unit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to consider each of the learning outcomes that were selected and just look at examples of where these outcomes were activated throughout the unit. So briefly looking at outcome 2.1, which is to explore design problems. Students were presented with the opportunities to explore a design problem through investigation, research, and experimentation with material. Firstly, Owen set a design task and co-constructed success criteria with his students. Co-constructing success criteria before students commence work on projects or activities is considered good practice, and it gives the students a clearer picture of what is expected of them in terms of what direction to go with their work. Owen, could you just give us a brief outline as to why you chose to use success criteria for this particular part of the task?
Yeah, I used success criteria to provide direction and create. I found that it creates ownership amongst the students on it as well. They had a better understanding of their progress. So I mentioned there that I used it in the previous project as well. It's just that when it's co-constructed, I feel that students have a better idea of what's expected of them. It's clear to everyone.
Okay, and equally, when you're giving student feedback, no doubt you would use the success criteria in that conversation with the students when you're putting feedback together as well.
That's right.
Looking at outcome 2.6, the outcome states that students should produce sketches, drawings, models, and prototype to explore design ideas. Students were encouraged to produce 2D and 3D sketches of their proposed design ideas. Owen used isometric grid paper as a support here. Orthographic grid paper was also supplied when students were producing 2D drawings. This is also done as a way of developing students' visualization skills by firstly sketching a 3D representation of their design idea and then moving to a 2D drawing to produce an elevation and end elevation of it. The grid was 10mm spacing, which was used to help provide proportion. Students also had access to the backboard material and also a sample hook made from the laminated material while working on design ideas to act as stimulus material. When providing oral feedback on student designs or any work, Owen encouraged the students to note or summarize his suggestions, and on some occasions he got the students to reproduce the design sketch to implement his feedback, maybe if the sketch was rushed or not up to the required standard. This emphasizes the process of design and the process of sketching rather than just the finished design or the finished sketch itself. This feedback is also further evidence of learning. When looking at outcome 1.5, which required students to represent key information graphically, examples of where students represent a key information graphically can be seen on this slide. The verb was activated through a research task and also when creating the reflection poster on the process of lamination. 2D and 3D sketches were used, as were images from magazines and cutouts, internet images and photographs, which are all forms of graphical communication. Students were asked to consider aspects of the design problem that they needed to find out more information about and to make notes of these questions before looking for information. Primary and secondary sources were discussed and the merits of each considered. The design guide was used here to support their thinking. The design guide provides the students with prompt questions to provoke their thought process when carrying out different tasks when engaging with design. Owen placed a big emphasis on conducting and recording primary research during this task. Owen, how did you support the students through this aspect of the unit?
Yeah, I found my students found research, difficult enough. In particular, where they'd start. So the design guide or design guide there was excellent for putting in prompt questions into the journal, as you mentioned there as well. So I explained that to themselves as well, that's where I had taken the prompt questions from, in the hope that they'd, use that design guide themselves in future projects.
Okay, that's very insightful.
So yeah, we co-constructed then success criteria as well. Regarding the research project. So they did a reflective project at the end. So we co-constructed the success criteria on that. I felt some students had left their kind of standards drop a bit during the project. So towards the end then as well, we tightened up and put success criteria in place for the reflective poster. So the success criteria there was to use some color annotation and to sequence the sheet a bit better.
Okay, well, that was actually something I remarked to myself when I was looking through your student learning journals, that that last sheet, the reflective poster on the process of lamination, the standard of work across the board was very, very high there. It was interesting though, as you said, to flick back through some of those learning journals to see what the sketching was like at the earlier parts of it, and it was definitely evident that the sketching improved dramatically after that success criteria had been put in place. That the use of colour and annotation really brought the level of sketching on a notch or two for a lot of students. And equally, I suppose it's no harm that students have examples of that to look at themselves, that they can see what a good sketch looks like, and also maybe what a not so good sketch looks like, and the steps that they took to bridge that gap in the middle.
Yeah.
Looking at outcome 1.7 now, where students were asked to explain the function and application of a range of tools and equipments. Throughout this unit, Owen would have demonstrated and used questioning throughout the practical applications of tools and equipments, and supported the students in their learning about the correct use of the laminate formers. Students were also asked to explain the fixtures and fittings that they chose to use to attach the artefact to a wall or door while carrying out the reflective poster. They were required to explain the applications of the tools and equipment used in the process of lamination. So equally, there's examples there on the slide of student work that they produced to explain different tools, different process, and equally different fixtures and fittings that they used. And again, the big emphasis throughout this whole section is on the student doing the work in terms of activation of the action verb. Looking at outcome 1.8, to achieve the key learning here, students were required to explore a design and realization task which involves lamination of wood. That was a design constraint that was embedded in the brief. As students had not experienced lamination prior to this unit, to correctly interpret the brief, there was a need to find out more about this, to find out where curved laminated timber comes from and how it's produced. So students gathered information through a research task and gained knowledge in this area. This knowledge was then applied when realizing their design idea. Teacher demonstration, as well as the use of real-life examples of curved laminated work, were beneficial here. Students would have applied other skills through the realization of this task as well, such as shaping, drilling, sanding, countersinking and inserting screws, and also applying a finish. It was also emphasized to students that while the new learning during this task was the lamination of timber, that the application of prior knowledge was central to the completion of the task also, and to encourage students to see value in their prior learning and also how it's applied to work going forward. And finally, looking at outcome 2.3, which was where students were asked to evaluate their own progress to inform future learning. Students carried out an evaluation of their work where they considered the impact of this exercise and what it had on pre-existing skills. This evaluation sheet is context specific to Owen's own class and their prior learning. If a teacher was considering a similar resource for their own use, they would need to reflect this in the sheet with an emphasis on their own students' prior learning. The student learning journal had a number of inbuilt reflection and evaluation moments which use prompt questions to assist the students when making considered decisions relating to their work and encouraging them to draw upon their prior learning where possible to make decisions. It's just worth pointing out too that those two examples of those project evaluation sheets were actually sent out by Owen following the school closures to his students, and these are copies of ones that he received back from his students, which is very, very admirable for both teacher and student in these testing times. So upon reflection at the end of this plan, I'm going to ask Owen to outline his thinking on 3 questions. And the 3 questions are: what learning have my students achieved? What assessments worked well for my students in their learning? And ultimately, where would Owen go next with his student learning? So Owen, could you maybe outline your thoughts on those couple of questions?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I'll start with the learning they achieved. So I would say that they learned a lot. Students learned a lot about working with a brief, the different stages in the design process, the importance of capturing ideas using notes and sketches, how to use and select fixtures and fittings would be another one, how to graphically represent information and the difference between primary and secondary research. How to, the other one then is obviously the big one, how and why you laminate wood. and the importance of reflection on their work and how this can impact on their future learning. So the next part to your question there, yes, the assessment. So the journal, I found the learning journal was excellent. It really backs up students' thought process and justification of ideas. It allows for greater depth and breadth then for when you're assessing those design guides. So the last part then is where will I go next? I suppose we're coming into the unit and that some of my students were struggling maybe a bit with research. We had done a bit of primary research. Like, it is understandable their first year, so I will definitely be doing more on the research area and maybe trying to introduce the design guide there on that one. As well as that, then they really enjoyed the design side of the project. So I felt, the design was maybe a bit constrained, so I'll give them a bit more freedom design-wise in the next project. Student sketching would have improved, like we said there in the research poster towards the end. So that was as a result of the success criteria. So again, I'll definitely use the success criteria to every aspect of a project. And then finally, I suppose what I'll do next is maybe might develop a bit more on their practical skills, the next unit, maybe some a new jointing method, possibly.
Okay, well, that's a very comprehensive overview. Just one thing I'd like to pick up in there, you mentioned that this particular design brief was quite constrained, and I suppose it was constrained in such a way to ensure particular outputs were achieved, such as lamination and the use of fixtures and fittings. That would be what might be referred to as quite a closed task, and the output, really, the emphasis was the development of those skills and that particular knowledge. As you outlined there, maybe the next time you're going to a design task that you might allow for a more open brief that students might have a little bit more scope to respond to, but equally that type of design challenge probably allows students to maybe express a little bit more of what they know through the project as well. So that's definitely a good progression there.
Yeah.
Why Owen chose to use the student logbook? Owen found that the learning journal was beneficial, as he outlined there, in terms of scaffolding progress, plenty of space to make notes and document research, equally to sketch and design, opportunities for the students to reflect regularly and make considered choices, and also lots of opportunities for the teacher to provide feedback. So going back to pick up on Owen had said there, he felt that his students were struggling with certain aspects of research, particularly around where to get started and equally how to go about documenting primary research in particular. And I suppose what the student logbook does really is it takes away some of the fear of the blank page there, gives the student a scaffold, but equally I suppose it probably directs the learning a little bit more and keeps both the student and teacher on point as they progress through the task. And equally, in relation to opportunities for feedback, as Owen outlined, there was a number of areas where success criteria were put in place. They were noted on that sheet, and when Owen was giving his feedback, it was very, very straightforward to refer back to those success criteria in those conversations around feedback. And equally, the artifact has gone out of the classroom. The students have brought it home. No doubt they're hanging coats all over Galway City at this stage. But in relation to CBA2, while the project itself may not be there, there's loads of evidence of learning captured in that logbook that could be very beneficial for those students as stimulus material if they chose to use it for CBA2. The classroom activities Owen engaged with provided lots of opportunities for students to develop research and evaluation skills, which are central to the process of preparing students for their classroom-based assessments. But equally, as that quotation mentions there, that they will help them to engage meaningfully. The design brief that Owen put in place allowed for this meaningful engagement to occur. Equally, the slide on your screen now just outlines where this particular unit aligns with certain aspects of CBA1 and CBA2. So we can see there that there was a research element in the task where they captured primary research and so on, which would have a direct link to a skill set maybe for CBA1. And likewise, there was a number of self-analysis and evaluation moments throughout the unit that would align themselves with a skill set for CBA2. Just to recap and go back to look again at a slide we had earlier, by understanding the why and the what, we're better positioned to plan for the how. If you consider the aim and rationale, of which technology to be the why and the what, The how is achieved through engagement with the learning outcomes. So we can see there we have a number of documents such as the Wood Technology Planning Tool, which contains all our learning outcomes, our strand and element overviews and so on, our Wood Technology Classroom-Based Assessment Guidelines, our NCCA Teaching and Learning Toolkits, and also the design guide, which is put together by the JCT4 team. There are resources there that are help us to plan for the how. The rationale and aim of the subject provide us with key messages regarding the student experience for wood technology over the 3 years and the transferable skills and knowledge that they will take away from our subject into senior cycle and beyond. What you can see there at the bottom of that slide are examples of the work that some of Owen's students produced throughout this unit. So we have examples of research, reflection, classroom activity, and also some of the finished artefacts. And I suppose one thing to consider when you may complete any particular unit is, does what I have planned to do align with the rationale and aim of wood technology? And I think it's fair to say, looking at what Owen's students have produced, that it very much so does there. So I'm just going to bring Owen back in for a minute, just to maybe outline some of the classroom management strategies he put in place for this particular unit from a practical perspective, and maybe certain criteria he chose to use when he was selecting materials and so on. So I'll bring Owen back in there for that.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah. There was a group, like you see there, the group is 24, so it's reasonably big, and we have a kind of an assembly area at the back of the room. So I kind of set that area up at the back where they'd go back, and you can see in the photograph there, they'd glue up their laminate, bring the laminate and the former back up to the desk and put it into the vise, as you can see there. It worked pretty well. It went fairly smooth, to be honest, over double class. You know, I had plenty of time to get that done. And,
just on that, you pre-cut the formers yourself for this particular unit.
That's right, Barry. Yeah, yeah, I did. I suppose you could have maybe put the option in there for the kids to cut themselves, but the idea is that I'd use those again. So, like, I'm running with a colleague there, so he'd have 24, and he's going to run this unit of learning as well. So, you know, I can pass them back and forth. The only thing with the formers there is you can see they're MDF, and some of them got damaged maybe in the crush in the vise. So maybe in hindsight, I should have made them in out of plywood.
And equally, I suppose, just to come in on that, while you had your identify key learning and your learning outcomes for this unit and so on, things like that bring other dimensions to the unit as well, where the students would have experienced what MDF is as a material and so on, and that's probably something you'll build on at a later stage, but equally it's a nice opportunity to introduce things like that. Equally, just something you outlined to me earlier as well, that you gave the students an option to choose a backboard of their choice from different types of materials. So you might just walk us through that as well.
Yeah, so just I suppose I went into the store and looked what was available, and as you see, the material for the backboard was something like about 150 by 70 mil. So I picked up a few bits. I had some walnut veneered MDF, some oak, some birch ply. I think they were the options that I gave them. Nobody went for the birch ply. I was surprised. A few for the oak, but most of them seemed to go for the MDF, veneered MDF. But it was a good opportunity, like you said, for materials. So some of them, the ones that did choose the oak or the mahogany, to cut, you know, to get used to using hardwoods.
Okay, that's very interesting, Owen. Thank you for that. And equally, you were giving a little bit more choice and flexibility to the student as well, in the sense that while the backboards were all the same size, having the opportunity to choose the one that they'd like to work with probably puts a little bit more ownership of the design into the students' hands as well. And equally, like that, broadens out their base of experiencing different materials through a different unit. The other thing I'd like to just point out there, Owen, as well, it appeared on some of your students' reflective posters where you'd introduced the concept of forces to the students, particularly at the stage when they're gluing up. So you can kind of see it there in the image on the slide. But equally, did you find that was a good way of actually bringing forces into the classroom, maybe for the first time?
Yeah, it was nice. It was, you know, a great opportunity to do that. You know, to highlight the compression force from the vise there onto the lamination piece.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Owen. At this stage, I'd just like to thank Owen for his input into this unit, and also for allowing us to collaborate with him and his students in Closhton, Corba and Galway. Big effort put in by Owen and the students in this particular unit, so I'd like to commend him for that. And at this stage, I'd just like Owen might just want to say goodbye to the audience. He's going to sign off now, and I'm going to conclude things in a moment myself.
Yeah, thanks very much, Barry, and thanks everybody for listening. All the best.
Thank you for watching. A recording of this webinar will be available and hosted on JCT in the coming weeks. I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time to tune in and engage with us. I hope you found this webinar to be beneficial. A number of ways, again, just to outline how you might keep up to date with the Wood Technology team. So you can, as I said, join our mailing list, which you can do on the JCT Technologies homepage. Equally, you can follow us on Twitter at JCT4Ed. And finally, I would just going to wrap things up by saying goodbye. Thank you to everybody for taking part in the webinar. We've had a very, very encouraging attendance. Over 123 teachers have been in and out of the webinar at various stages. And I'm going to leave the channel open for a period of time now if anybody has additional questions to get in. But other than that, I'm going to mute my mic and sign off. Thank you very much.